Boa tarde, sejam muito bem-vindos a mais um evento digital. Na verdade, é o nosso 5º evento da série que a Deloitte faz em aliança com a Singularity University. E hoje, um dia muito importante para falarmos sobre Indústria 4.0. A transformação, de fato, acelerou. É verdade, vivemos uma pandemia que trouxe temas que estavam há 4, 5 anos adiante, trouxemos muito para perto. Estamos avançando muito rápido e, claro, isso deve ter e já tem apresentado resultados e impactos muito diferentes e importantes para as nossas indústrias, para o nosso consumo, para o serviço, para todos os nossos serviços e ações empresariais de uma forma geral. É claro que essas transformações aceleraram, isso requereu e ainda vai requerer muito empenho das nossas indústrias, das nossas pessoas, dos nossos líderes, e a tecnologia é sempre uma grande aliada quando a gente fala sobre transformação e sobre indústria. Então, eu gostaria aqui de ressaltar que esse evento traz a Deloitte e a Singularity University com muita atenção para esse tema. Estamos presentes, estamos discutindo as transformações, estamos convidando pessoas, a exemplo desse evento de hoje, que traz Geoff Wylde, que é o líder da Internet das Coisas, robótica e Smart Cities do Fórum Econômico Mundial. E ele não vem sozinho, porque junto com ele virão várias outras pessoas importantes do Brasil e de fora do Brasil, que vão falar junto conosco aqui hoje à tarde sobre a revolução industrial da indústria 4.0. Muito bem, eu gostaria de convidá-los para um super painel que vai começar agora, com o Gustavo Rocha, que é o nosso sócio-líder da Deloitte de inovação, e ele vai trazer uma moderação de painel com o nosso líder da indústria para consumo, Ricardo Balkins, Alexandre Mendonça Alvaro, que também é pesquisador especialista em indústria 4.0 e IoT da Ambev Tech. É importante a gente perceber que a Ambev, aliás, é uma das empresas parceiras da Deloitte, da Singularity University, nesse ecossistema que nós criamos, e essa é a primeira organização que nós convidamos aqui hoje. Temos um super prazer de ouvi-los para compor esse painel que se chama Agentes Singulares. A partir desse evento, vocês vão ver repetidamente todos os nossos eventos com painéis de agentes singulares, a exemplo da Ambev. Rocha, agora é com você e seus convidados.
Olá, Ana. Obrigado. Esta quarta-feira de chuva, mas bastante conhecimento aqui em São Paulo. Estou aqui com o Alexandre, estou aqui com o Balkins para falar nesse tema que está super em alta, estava em alta antes da pandemia e agora, durante e pós-pandemia, vai ser muito mais relevante. Alexandre, para a gente começar essa conversa, a Ambev é uma indústria super tradicional e agora sempre muito em vanguarda, muito inovadora, anunciou recentemente um investimento pesado lá em Pernambuco numa indústria, uma fábrica nova, né, que vai fazer uso de tecnologias e processos inerentes à indústria 4.0. Quando a Ambev anuncia e faz um investimento desse, o que a Ambev espera? O que está por trás dessa estratégia? E acho que aproveito aqui, Álvaro, se quiser dar uma palhinha de onde você vem e qual é o seu background para o nosso público aqui.
Legal. Prazer falar com vocês. Obrigado pelo convite, Rocha, Balkins, todo mundo que tá aqui. É muito legal poder participar com vocês, né? Então, eu sou Alexandre Álvaro, eu sou pesquisador na Ambev Tech, que é o hub de tecnologia da Ambev, né? Onde a gente faz aí as pontas de tecnologia e traz algumas coisas bem legais que a gente já vai falar daqui a pouquinho. Mas então, eu vim da indústria mesmo, comecei na parte de automação, trabalhei em alguns projetos bem bacanas aí no Brasil, tipo caminhão de bombeiros para infraero, software dele, abertura de poço de petróleo para Petrobras, automação de sistema de saneamento de Buenos Aires, de comportas lá. Então tem um background bem pautado nessa parte industrial, tá? E muito para a indústria também, usinas hidrelétricas, várias coisas. E recentemente, agora, nos últimos 5 anos, eu estou aqui com a Ambev Tech participando de toda essa renovação que a gente está fazendo, que a gente está entendendo que essas mudanças fazem parte daquilo que a gente não mais... não é apenas uma vontade, é uma necessidade, sabe? E a gente precisa se reinventar, a gente precisa entender qual que é a nossa essência. E esse investimento ali em Itapissuma, né, Itapissuma, desculpa, errei o nome em Itapissuma, no Pernambuco, ele aconteceu em virtude de uma ampliação para que a gente pudesse fornecer para o Norte e Nordeste líquidos puro malte, né, e também para que a gente pudesse ter essa nova linha, que, de acordo com a minha anotação aqui, 120 mil latas por hora, tá? Capacidade de produção. Então, e tudo isso utilizando características de indústria 4.0, de IoT. A gente entende isso como muito importante, como a verticalização da tecnologia, sair daquele modelo horizontal de comunicação e comunicar direto com a nuvem para ter respostas muito rápidas, nos ajudam na tomada de decisão e fazer a coisa realmente acontecer. Então, é necessidade, é importante demais estar surfando essa onda.
E aí a gente tem alguns, e aí você já começou a entrar nos detalhes, né? A gente tem alguns conceitos muito clássicos e inerentes ao que a gente fala de indústria 4.0, né? Essa integração é muito mais do que a integração do físico com o digital, é uma forma muito nova de enxergar o processo de indústria, é fim a fim, né? Acho que é bem por aí. E a Ambev, falando de verticalização, ela está indo para este caminho. Dos benefícios que a gente busca, desses conceitos, o que você acha que vai ser prioridade? O que vai impulsionar efetivamente a eficiência e produtividade nesses processos dessa nova fábrica e, eventualmente, outras fábricas que a Ambev tem aqui no país?
Legal essa pergunta, Rota. Eu vou responder ela de um jeito um pouquinho inesperado, né? Porque, na verdade, eu acho que um conceito isolado ou outro, ele não faz parte do todo, né? O próprio conceito de indústria 4.0, ele abrange alguns pontos que são muito importantes em conjunto. Então, quando a gente passa a utilizar sensores para entender e capturar a informação do mundo, que é assim que a gente captura mesmo, né? Através da visão, do olfato, esse tipo de coisa, e a gente utiliza os sensores em maquinário e utiliza esses dados de maneira inteligente, e quando eu digo inteligente, inteligência mesmo, artificial, esse tipo de coisa, para tratar esses dados, e a gente fecha o loop tendo uma devolutiva, a gente aprende como produzir, garantido um sabor de cerveja adequado, entender uma predição de uma manutenção que pode acontecer numa fábrica, a gente tem muito ganho, tanto no produto final, quanto no próprio processo e facilidade de trabalho. Então, hoje em dia, eu acredito que é muito importante a gente automatizar as coisas que são básicas, né, para que as pessoas possam se preocupar com aquilo que é mais inerente à criatividade, ao pensar em novos sabores, a pensar em soluções customer-centric, né, que é onde a gente realmente começa a prestar atenção no nosso consumidor. E é isso que importa para a gente. Vamos automatizar aquilo que é básico e dar estrutura para os nossos funcionários trabalharem bem e serem bastante criativos, nossos colaboradores, né? Funcionário não, pessoas, as pessoas que estão com a gente lá.
Excelente. O Balkins, acho que com a sua expertise aí de indústria, né? Acho que a sua experiência pode ajudar nessa conversa aqui. Como a gente começou nessa conversa falando de transformação digital, indústria 4.0, a gente falou de movimentos que já começaram, obviamente, muito antes da pandemia. Como que você vê em outras indústrias, né? Acho que principalmente na indústria de consumo, além do negócio da Ambev, o que você vê? Como é que a pandemia acelerou esse processo de transformação e trouxe mais próximos a necessidade a urgência dessa transformação aterrizar mesmo?
Bom, de uma forma bastante sucinta, a gente está falando aqui dos conceitos da indústria 4.0, que eles não são tão novos assim, né? A gente já vem discutindo isso há alguns anos e dá para perceber, nós que estamos mais em contato aí com as empresas, pelo menos eu no setor de consumo, e que as empresas têm adquirido maturidade ao longo dos últimos anos, né? Então, hoje eu posso dizer o seguinte, praticamente 100% aí das empresas com as quais a gente atua, elas têm, de uma certa forma, alguma iniciativa, tá? Que hoje a gente está chamando isso de transformação, tá? Mas que, na verdade, busca você adotar todos aqueles conceitos que a gente fala da indústria 4.0, porque esse conceito de indústria 4.0 ele é bastante amplo, né? Então ele passa por automação, passa por integração aí, como já foi dito, de tecnologias físicas e digitais, uso de técnicas de analytics, inteligência artificial e por aí vai. Então, assim, tudo isso, né, fez com que as empresas começassem a perceber que para que se use e tenha o benefício de todos esses conceitos, é necessário o que estamos falando aí como transformação de negócios, transformação das empresas e tudo mais. Eu vou dizer que, como eu disse, esse conceito aqui já vem sendo discutido. Eu acho que o ambiente da pandemia ele acabou acelerando um pouco, né? Tem alguns clientes meus que estavam apostando bastante, vamos dizer assim, em tecnologias digitais para e-commerce. E o que eles falaram é o seguinte: olha, o e-commerce para nós não era uma novidade, nós já tínhamos planejado isso. O que vai acontecer é que nós vamos fazer 4 anos se tornarem 4 meses, tá? Por conta da necessidade que eles tiveram do cenário, então eles tiveram que acelerar a implementação de muita coisa. Uma coisa que você perguntou aí para o Alexandre, que eu acho que está meio em linha e eu concordo, acho que por que as empresas estão pensando nisso? Porque as empresas hoje estão cada vez mais em busca de eficiência, né, que está relacionado à redução de custo, melhoria de margem e melhor atendimento de clientes, né? Eu acho que hoje existem alguns termos aí que estão sendo muito usados no mercado, que são Customer Experience, Employee Experience, e que nós, da Deloitte, a gente tem até uma visão que a gente diz que a gente devia tratar People Experience, né? Que, na verdade, é tratar a experiência das pessoas, sim, focando na experiência interna e na experiência externa. Então, eu acho que o foco é a otimização, a sobrevivência, melhoria de margem, e a gente não pode esquecer aqui de um ponto extremamente importante, que são pessoas, né? Então, as organizações estão reconhecendo que não basta você ter tecnologia física, digital para combinar e tudo mais, você precisa de pessoas que tenham um pensamento diferente para você poder orquestrar aí essa transformação e poder depois colher os frutos, né, no futuro.
Não, excelente. Eu acho que isso conecta, Balkins, com a próxima pergunta, né? A gente tem várias frentes. Dinheiro não é infinito, exceto para a Ambev, talvez seja infinito aqui, mas para a maioria das empresas dinheiro não é infinito. Alexandre, não precisa, vai comigo nessa.
Vamos lá.
A gente tem algumas áreas que a gente pode apostar mais e colocar um pouco mais pesar um pouco mais a tinta, né, na hora de assinar esse cheque. Talvez a gente possa pensar na área de P&D, na área de adoção de soluções de mercado mais inovadoras, mais de vanguarda, buscar startups, fazer as conexões com Open Innovation e soluções de mercado desses novos entrantes aqui, ou também investir no tipo de perfil das pessoas que estão dentro da empresa, né, de que tornam esse papel principal dessa transformação. O que a gente acha? O que é a sua visão? E aí você já compartilhou um pouco isso, mas o que é a sua visão que deveria ser a peça central desta conversa de um projeto de transformação digital e focado na indústria?
É para o Alexandre, né?
Não, para você mesmo, Balkins.
Isso.
Eu achei que era para o Alexandre.
Mas a
Pode
gente
ser para o Alexandre
responde
também.
junto. A gente responde junto. Vai lá, Balkins. Começa que eu complemento.
Eu acho assim, conforme a gente tinha até conversado, né? Eu acho que os focos, a gente vê aí na indústria de consumo, né? Eu posso dizer, pelo menos aqui pela minha experiência, acho que um dos principais focos que eu vejo hoje na necessidade dessa transformação está focado na área de supply chain, tá? Na cadeia como um todo. Seja na eficiência de plantas, de centros de distribuição e principalmente em transporte e logística, né? Então, eu vejo que as empresas de consumo investem muito nessa parte de logística, de automação de fábricas e tudo mais, porque acaba sendo talvez até mais o desafio maior que elas têm que não a produção, né? Eu diria o seguinte: a Ambev, fazer cerveja deve ser uma coisa trivial. Acho que você não precisa de cientista lá para fazer cerveja. Vocês sabem fazer, já tem as fórmulas, tudo, vocês têm automação. Então, o que é o ponto que, por exemplo, pode pegar para uma empresa como a Ambev? É a parte de distribuição, que eu acho que é o grande diferencial que existe hoje, né? Então, assim, produzir cerveja legal, tem escala, que nem o Alexandre falou aqui, chega a produzir 120 mil latas por hora, que é um negócio nem pensar, né, no volume que
Uma linha.
Agora você fala assim, como é que eu faço isso chegar no meu consumidor? Da forma como ele quer, da forma rápida como ele quer. Então, esses são os desafios, né? Então, eu vejo que, pelo menos nesse segmento que a gente está atuando aqui de consumo, a parte de supply chain, ela é absolutamente relevante, por isso que muitas empresas estão começando por aí.
Muito legal, Balkins, pegar esse ponto, porque a gente tem uma visão que nesse negócio do focado no usuário, no consumidor, a gente sempre precisa pensar o que realmente é o problema que a gente quer resolver. Tecnologia, ela é ferramenta, ela é habilitador de tudo isso, né? É legal a gente ser early adopter de uma tecnologia, a gente saber o que está acontecendo para a gente não perder aquele hype cycle, né? Vamos dizer assim, então pegar quando o negócio está nascendo. Isso é ótimo, mas mais importante que isso, e um negócio que a gente até já tinha conversado uma outra vez, é a questão de fazer a pergunta certa. Eu acho que quando a gente descobre como utilizar a tecnologia da melhor maneira, aí sim a gente acha a solução para as coisas, né? Até vou puxar um gancho aqui, tá? Desculpa aqui, Rota, vou puxar um gancho que é a questão de... É até isso que a gente espera da parceria com a Singularity University, tá? Que a gente possa ajudar a pensar como solucionar esses problemas indo além da tecnologia, para que a gente tenha essa parceria de uma forma que a gente entenda de verdade o que está acontecendo e como solucionar. Eu gosto de dar aquele exemplinho do aeroporto nos Estados Unidos, né, que tinha um alto índice de reclamação de retirada de bagagens. E eles sempre corriam atrás de como é que a gente acelera a bagagem. E estava fazendo a pergunta errada, porque a pergunta não é essa, esse não é o problema. Você está tentando disfarçar uma solução que você tem em mente como se fosse a pergunta. E, na verdade, é como é que eu reduzo o índice de reclamação. Então, hoje em dia, no aeroporto nos Estados Unidos, você desce bem longe de onde está a sua bagagem, anda pra caramba, vê um monte de lojinha legal e depois vai lá e retira a sua bagagem e o índice de reclamação baixa. Então, você atrasou o passageiro e não acelerou a bagagem e conseguiu a solução para o que precisava. Então, é fazer as perguntas certas e achar a solução certa pensando no nosso consumidor. É isso que a gente tem que buscar e é isso que a gente espera.
Alexandre, eu vou até interromper aqui, não sei se o Rota ia falar, mas eu gostei até de um outro exemplo que você deu, naquela conversa que a gente teve lá, do drone, né?
Uhum.
Lembra? Que
Sim.
você falou assim, olha, recebo uma demanda de uma área dizendo, olha, vem cá, eu preciso que você me ajude aqui, como é que eu vou colocar um drone aqui no meu CD para poder controlar meu estoque? Aí a tua pergunta é, pô, peraí, o problema é colocar o drone ou controlar o estoque, né? Vai em linha com o que você falou, pergunta certa. Né? Quem disse que você precisa de drone lá?
Perfeito, excelente colocação.
Sem querer cortar a vibe aqui, a Ana daqui a pouco vai começar a puxar a minha orelha. Acho que valeu como um ótimo aquecimento aqui. E aí, sem ser preto, não é nada é preto no branco, né? A ferro e fogo, mas acho que para a pergunta errada, boa parte acho que se não todas, quase todas as respostas são erradas, né?
Sim.
Obrigado, Balkins, obrigado, Alexandre. Excelente participação, acho que é apenas o começo de uma conversa que a gente vai ouvir bastante aqui ao longo da tarde. Espero que vocês aproveitem. Ana, é com você. Obrigado, viu?
Obrigado.
Obrigado a você, foi um prazer aqui, tá? Agora que a gente estava aquecendo,
começa a esquentar, aí começa a esquentar. A gente quer mais tempo, a gente quer mais compartilhamento de boas histórias. A gente vê que, de fato, são investimentos volumosos em inovação e tecnologia, e a tendência é que isso aumente muito mais. A gente vê verticalização dessa tecnologia, a comunicação da indústria diretamente com a nuvem, como foi colocado aqui pelo Alexandre, grande tratamento de dados, mas uma das coisas mais importantes aqui, estamos fazendo as boas perguntas. Né? Gostei dessa provocação, porque... Como muito bem dito, a tecnologia é uma ferramenta, ou são várias ferramentas, as pessoas estão no centro dessas experiências todas de tecnologia, de indústria 4.0, e, por falar em indústria 4.0, o grande convidado de hoje à tarde é o Geoff Wylde. Geoff, I would like to say thank you for your presence with us in this event. We are talking about Brazil on transformation journey. So would you please tell us your thoughts and your insights about the fourth industrial revolution, what you have to say to us, to Brazil, to our challenges. And so it's your home, please feel free.
So my name is Geoffrey Wylde. I'm the lead for Internet of Things, Robotics, and Smart Cities at the World Economic Forum. For those who aren't familiar, the World Economic Forum is the international organization for public-private cooperation. Most people are familiar with our annual meeting in Davos every year, where we bring together world leaders from business, civil society, academia, and government to work on some of the most pressing challenges that our society faces. What some people may not know is that a number of years ago, the World Economic Forum opened a center in San Francisco focused on how the use of emerging technology is impacting our societies and our economies. And actually, just last year, in partnership with the state of Sao Paulo and the Ministry of Economy of Brazil, we're pleased to have launched an affiliate center looking at similar topics based in Brazil. Now, shortly, I'll be joined by a panel of experts on the topic of Industry 4.0 and in particular, industrial IoT and what's changed over the last year. Before I get into that, I'm just going to offer a few perspectives on how the last year has completely shifted, the world in which we live in as it relates to Industry 4.0. We'll share just a couple slides as I go through this. The first thing to note is that our ability to create policies and business systems that govern the impact of technology and mitigate the risk of technology is slower than the pace of technology change. It's easier to invent new technologies than it is to invent new economic systems or new political machinations. And as we adopt more IoT devices and other Industry 4.0 technologies, that rate of change is exponential. And yet we can only change our economic and political structures incrementally. The difference between this is what I'll refer to as a governance gap. And it is a focus of what the World Economic Forum is looking at. Where are these key governance gaps and what can we do about them to ensure that these technologies are fulfilling their promise of an improved quality of life for as many people as possible? In December, the forum published a report examining particularly IoT's impact and where the critical governance gaps in the Internet of Things were. We published this in December. The report's called The Future of the Connected World. I encourage everyone to go take a look, obviously. And interestingly, one of the key findings of our report was that the largest governance gap we observed was in the fairness and equitable distribution of IoT. Now, many people would have thought that safety and security and privacy and trust might be the most critical areas. And in fact, our research found that the risk associated with those is very high. But there's also a lot of work being done on improving privacy and safety and security standards, whereas there is less work being done at how we can distribute the benefits of IoT to as many people and as equitably as possible. Another interesting finding of our work was that there was almost near consensus among IoT experts that the pandemic will likely accelerate the adoption of IoT and likely other Industry 4.0 technologies. What we found last year was a temporary slowdown in adoption of IoT generally, although when you looked in specific use cases, like healthcare, for example, you saw increasing adoption. However, across almost every use case we looked at, the projection post-COVID-19 was showing a faster rate of growth than projections prior to COVID-19. And I'd really like to dig into that, the reasons behind that with the panel that I'll introduce in just one moment. Out of this faster adoption, we're currently seeing three themes for post-COVID Industry 4.0. Obviously, it's too early to say what the future will look like, but I do want to just highlight these three themes and understand from our panelists how they view them. The first one is prioritizing resiliency over efficiency. COVID-19 revealed the fragility in our global supply chains, even in how we designed and went about our workplaces, and the reliance on individuals to maintain, healthy and happy societies in order to underwrite a robust economic activity. Prior to COVID, a lot of Industry 4.0 was focused on taking cost out, on making operations lean. And what we're seeing now is a shift towards making operations robust. The second point I want to bring to light is the idea of stakeholder capitalism and corporate social responsibility. I'm going to quote Mark Carney a little bit on this, the former governor of the Bank of England. He kind of pointed out that after COVID-19, companies will be judged on what they did during the crisis. How did they treat their employees, their suppliers, and their customers? Who shared the goods that they had and who hoarded them? COVID-19 has been a catalyst for businesses to take a greater role in the benefit of all society. And we think that that trend is here to stay. And the final point that I want to bring up is around social acceptance of Industry 4.0 technology. Now, the most obvious example of this is remote work. I saw one statistic just today that about 45% of Americans are working remotely, and that even over the long run, it's expected that half of those will never go back to their workplace permanently. We've really undergone a structural shift of how we work and how we interact with technology. It's a total revolution in our relationship with technology and the infrastructure behind that technology. If I can't connect to the internet, it might mean I can't go to school, or it might mean that I can't be economically productive. When we think of Industry 4.0, the attitudes towards employees who in the past may have been resistant to digital transformation, those same employees may now be demanding that technology in their operations and in their workplaces. So those are the three themes that I want to raise today. And we're going to dig into those further with our panel, which I'm going to introduce right now. I'm really pleased to be joined by Oliver Trinchera, a co-founder and CEO of Connection, Francisco Soares, the VP of Government Affairs for Latin America for Qualcomm, Marcia Ogawa, the lead partner for technology, media, and telecommunications at Deloitte, Brazil, and Professor Marcello Zufo, the Professor of Electronic Systems Engineering at the Department of the Polytechnic School of the University of Sao Paulo. And I'm just going to jump right in. And Oliver, I'm going to turn to you first. I brought up the idea of a shift in Industry 4.0 from efficiency to resiliency. How have you seen this play out in your experience and in Connection in particular?
Yeah, Geoff, first of all, thank you very much for your great explanation. You addressed some very important aspects, and I just can confirm what you said. The resilience aspect has become more important from a relative perspective. And so if you would have a pie chart, then resilience in the past occupied just a small piece, and now it has become a significant piece. Why is this the case? I think in the end, business continuity is one of the most essential things that became apparent during the crisis. So we had to make sure that first of all, our workers are safe, and second of all, that we are able to continue to produce goods for three reasons. I think one is the legal aspect. So you have to protect the workers because it's a liability aspect. But even more important than that, it was a social obligation to keep the supply chains up, especially if we're talking about very important goods like masks or like medical goods and other stuff. So I think this is an important aspect. And last but not least, it's also from an economic standpoint essential for companies to keep their supply chain up and running, because once the supply chain breaks down, they might lose contracts, they might lose customers, and therefore business continuity and worker safety, the new form of resilience, has now a very, very important aspect. But nevertheless, I would add that cost optimization and productivity still remains an issue. An important challenge, last but not least, because we see more nearshoring tendencies. We bring production back into those countries that have high labor costs, and this forces the companies to find some very intelligent ways of how to optimize those production environments. Importantly, and of course, with Industry 4.0. And the last aspect that I have seen arising is that also flexibility and agility plays a very important aspect. I'm not sure what your perspective is on that, but I've seen that many companies are struggling with the need to quickly adjust their supply chain based on changing demands in the market. And so this would be the third aspect that I noticed during the past 12 months.
You know, I'm going to come back to the supply chain resiliency point in a minute, Oliver, but I'm curious to go back to something you said earlier around, you know, the new kind of priorities that you've seen. Has that played out in the kinds of use cases that you're seeing demand for in the market, or have the kind of use cases and demand stayed relatively stable?
So I would say that COVID has been a kind of facilitator for all digitization use cases. So digitization has experienced an enormous acceleration through COVID-19. So one example that I see very important is remote work, which you addressed already, because in many cases it's not reasonable to send people to crowded places where they might suffer from an infection. At the same time, the use case of robotics has increased significantly, especially if we have a look at logistics and warehouses, very important trend. I think what has also increased is connectivity and digitization efforts that give us an end-to-end visibility of supply chains, so that in every case we have a full transparency of where our goods are, but also where our risks are, so that in case that something might go wrong, we have the option to quickly react. So we have now, with those digitization efforts, I would say a full or complete new level in terms of planning, in terms of visibility, in terms of control, so that we can optimize these changes. Maybe one aspect that we can also add is operational excellence. So we see that now those, let's say, very comprehensive use cases that combine the connectivity aspect with the analytical aspect in order to, let's say, achieve a new level of automation. Those cases have also become more and more prominent, especially if we look at automation, for example, of material transport. So driverless transport systems have experienced an exponential growth over the past 12 months, and also many other cases. And last but not least, referring also to the aspect of worker safety, I think wearables have also increased in terms of pervasion. As you said, the social acceptance is higher. Of course, there is a certain, let's say, precondition to that. One of those preconditions is that you have to comply with data privacy standards. So I think we've seen that the rise of IoT technology, especially if it's close to the worker, close to the employee, has also increased the need for a sustainable use of data privacy laws. So this is what I would say from my personal experience.
And how is that, I mean, just picking up on your personal experience, what has all this meant for Connection's own business? What changes have you seen?
So I would consider it from two sides. First of all, we are also an international company with offices here in Europe, in the US, and we were also affected by COVID. We were not allowed to travel. We had to care about our employees, send them quickly into home office and ensure that nobody gets infected or suffers any consequences from the disease. So I think I share the same role as many other participants in this call. But of course, as a company that employs digitization to optimize, to automate supply chains and manufacturing processes, our company has seen a strong increase when it comes to the demand for those goods. And there is one particular aspect. I mean, Kinexon is a company that has a very strong skill set when it comes to combining wearable technology, classical hardware technology with software technology. And when COVID broke out, we quickly launched a new generation of sensor that can easily enable organizations to ensure the distance between their workers. And this way we were able to significantly reduce the risk of infection. So we have a lot of case studies where we have demonstrated that within 5 days of use, the risk or through close contact has been reduced by almost 100%. So I think in the pandemic, this was a very diligent move to create something not only that gives your own employees a certain purpose in such a difficult situation, but that creates also significant value for society. And in the meantime, I'm proud to say that we have secured more than 1 billion critical contacts around the world with many large organizations like the major US sports leagues, MLB, NBA, NFL that are using this technology, but also very small organizations in different countries around the world, organizations with 20 to 30 people that have employed this technology to really protect the most valuable resource, the employees, and to secure business continuity.
Interesting, Oliver. It sounds like that not only have you changed your company's operations, but also really embrace new revenue opportunities that are also kind of additive to the fight against COVID. And I think that is such a holistic story for how COVID has impacted, just one company. And it's all right. I actually want to turn to Francisco next and get your take on this, Francisco. As the VP of Government Affairs of a large international organization like Qualcomm, how have you seen your company's role in fighting COVID, and how has Qualcomm reacted to this kind of new world that we're living in?
Okay. Hi, Geoff. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your introduction. And I would like to start saying that I do agree with you when you say that resilience is the key word for now over the efficiency. So as you mentioned in your introductory words, I think that Qualcomm understands that to address the resiliency, there are at least 3 things that are essential. This is technology, the other one is connectivity, and the other one is innovation. So there are many cases, many use cases addressing these 3 matters, but perhaps I could just mention some of them that we are more directly involved. For instance, on education. So education has changed a lot. Students need to keep learning. And with the COVID, many schools now they have to share the time between the school and other places. So they need to stay 1 week in the school and half of the students at home, and then they change this, go to the school. But you need to keep them doing their tasks and learning and keeping the condition to continue their activities. And the government, I had experience recently where I met with several secretaries of education of states in Brazil, and my intention is to have this meeting with all of them to understand their challenges, what they need, what they are doing with this regard. Brazil, it's a country that, there are lack of many things. Students, low-income students, they most of them, they don't have a laptop, for instance. So the government needs to provide this. Since 2015, we don't have any kind of federal initiative in Brazil in order to provide equipment to the students. So it's something that nowadays the governments are very much interested and trying to do this. And there are some funds and budgets that they have being addressed to acquire equipment to those students. And this is very important, very challenging, I would say. And there are a lot of initiatives from the state governments in order not only to provide equipment, but also provide connectivity. So some of them are only provide connectivity, which is not ideal because they cannot do too much with the connectivity if they don't have the equipment to work on this connectivity. So Qualcomm has developed recently a new technology that we are bringing to Brazil. For instance, we call ACPC, Always Connected Personal Computer, that with a very different technology and very new technology based on Snapdragon processor that comes from the mobile technology, with a life battery very long, and it does not require to keep charging the laptops as we need to do now. So it's something very interesting to address to these students, and we are working with the governments in order to provide, or at least to provide this alternative for them to acquire equipment for those use. So this is one thing. We have others, Wi-Fi and hotspots and everything that's associated with connectivity that would be important to address the homework gap. Mm-hmm. Small business. Well, I think small business become more digital than ever. I think it's important to keep this and focus on the small business for the people. And Qualcomm has a project called Qualcomm Small Business Accelerator that was created in June 2019, last year, where 33 businesses were selected from more than 375 applicants nationwide, including all states of the United States, including the District of Columbia. This area is spanning healthcare, education, crisis response, arts, environment, services, and industry. So all these different alternatives, and most identify as women-owned, minority-owned, and also veteran-owned people. So they receive up to $25,000 depending on the needs of each project. So Qualcomm is supporting this, and they would be able to buy mobile computing connectivity solutions and always connect PC, as I mentioned in the case of Brazil. It's already there in the United States, though we don't have this in Brazil at all for now, but we are working to bring this to here and make the population available for the population here in Brazil, for the students here in Brazil, but in United States is already a reality. Corporation. So we are all working from home for a long time. So Qualcomm, we are since last year working from home. Of course, the corporation corporation companies, they have less difficult to survive than compared with the small business, but they still need to keep the productivity. So, and the connectivity is essential for that. Innovation is essential for that. So, home office, we are all in this kind of, and I think that's the reality shows that maybe it will be extended more. So we are going to be in home office until June 2021, but the company has already mentioned that it would be extended one year more. So the needs to connectivity in your homes, in your place, it's very high. So of course, we are in Brazil now discussing a new auction for 5G. Most likely it will happen tomorrow. Then they will reach an agreement, and we are going to have more bands for 5G, and not only for 5G, for Wi-Fi 6. Of course, it's also in the agenda of the Anatel's board for tomorrow. Hopefully, it will be approved, and we have a more set of bands, including sub-6 and millimeter waves, where it will bring a lot of new advantages to address this challenge that we have nowadays. Another thing that I would like to mention is healthcare. Healthcare, it's another COVID has changed healthcare a lot. I mean, in the case of Brazil, for instance, doctor visual appointments now are a reality. Before the COVID, it was not allowed. It was allowed telemedicine when you have two doctors far away and discussing and doing something. But patient with the doctor director it's far away from the patient, it was not allowed. Now it's allowed, and I think that the trend is to keep this even after the COVID. So I think that this will change a lot. So it does not come back. So many things won't come back anymore. And this one example, good example that I'd like to mention this and raise also this. We have nice projects on the health. We have projects in Morro do Alemão, in Rio de Janeiro, where we control diabetes from some people through the use of tablets and smartphones, and very interesting projects. We have implemented this in some years ago. We also worked with during the COVID in the green and the yellow blood project, something in order to make more safety people to donor blood, because people are afraid to go to the hospital or any place to donor blood, but people they need this, so it's necessary to address this in a different way. You need to do this in the safe way. So there is this is a very interesting project that we also implemented here in Brazil during the COVID. So this is some vital examples of use case, but there are many others. So yes, we are going to face much more in the near future, of course.
Francisco, I think that example you give of a policy change of Brazil now allowing remote medicine is a great example of how COVID is changing the policy landscape, changing the technology landscape, changing how we go about our daily lives. You know, I understand before the pandemic, Qualcomm Corporate Ventures, I think it was, and the Brazilian National Development Bank, BNDES, came together to develop a IoT-focused investment fund. I'm curious for your perspective on how the priorities of that investment fund may have changed over the last year because of things like whether it's telemedicine or Industry 4.0. I'm curious for your thoughts on how the strategy of that fund may have changed.
Yeah, we are very much interested in IoT, of course. It's something that it's our focus here in Brazil. I've been personally following all the studies and related to the IoT national plan. And now we are building a fund focused on IoT with a partnership of BNDES, the bank, and where we are trying to get some startups to participate also. BNDES and Qualcomm share an amount of money to start the fund, and half of the fund was funded by Qualcomm and BNDES. And we are now getting some partners to be part of this initiative. we select Indicator Capital as a manager of this fund. It's already there. They are already working. It's not launched officially. We started this in December 2019, but the fund, most likely we are going to announce this publicly very soon, in the few weeks, I would say. And people, I cannot provide too many details on that. It's still something not publicly, but this fund it's already with several companies. So we were able to get from the market several companies interested on this and be part of this. Okay, so we believe that Brazil has a potential to innovate in IoT. So this is why we are focused our efforts on this activity. So we I don't think we have also others investments here in IoT. There is our Qualcomm Venture has invested in a company called HiLab. I don't know if you heard about this company here in Brazil. They do rapid laboratory tests for COVID, and Qualcomm Ventures funded this company, and they were very active during the past year, and they're still doing a lot of things here in Brazil. Well, finally, I think that we believe that Brazil can be a great innovator in IoT, especially in the areas of where we are focusing a lot nowadays, agribusiness, industry, and health as well. So this is our main focus at this moment.
Brilliant. Thank you, Francisco. That's helpful context, and I'm sure many folks listening today will be very interested in the announcement that will be coming out shortly.
Yeah, it will be very interesting.
Yeah, great. Marcia, I want to turn to you. We heard from Francisco just now around how things like digital medicine have changed radically, and people are going to be going to the doctor over the phone, for example. How have you seen social attitudes towards technology change in Brazil over the last year?
Oh, yes, Geoff. So first of all, congratulations for your preliminary presentation and the introduction. I think those 3 points that you have picked up are very relevant. So I think I would say the legacy in terms of the social worries, I think we can split in 4 areas. The legacy that the COVID has left to us, are giving to us, right? First is this collaboration between public and private. As Francisco mentioned, not only Qualcomm, but several other companies are, the COVID gave opportunity that the private can collaborate with the public. And what's important is not the collaboration itself, but what remained unconsciously in each person. I mean, the collective consciousness. And so the companies will succeed only if the society as a whole succeeds. And these are the links to the stakeholder capitalism that you mentioned in your introductory slides. And we can see several examples in companies are changing the way that interact with the society. And this is much more important, very important in emerging countries like Brazil, because the public sector workforce, they do not have enough arms, enough funds to control the pandemic. So I have never seen in Brazilian history such a collaboration, because we have never passed through wars. So this is the first war that Brazil is passing through. And all this collaboration happened in our country. And specifically for Industry 4.0, we had several initiatives that were possible due to this collaboration. I think Marcelo Zucco can then later explain one of the cases. And the second legacy is also technology adoption and innovation, right? So the companies had to reinvent themselves to face the COVID. there is a strong correlation between the companies that invest in technology and their resilience in the pandemic. Back again to your slide, resilience. See an example, I think Mr. Balkins said about logistics, online e-commerce, even banking in Brazil. There are several cases in Brazil, successful cases. So the COVID forced the Brazilian companies to adopt and heavily technology and invest in innovation to survive. Yeah, and under this pressure, scenario of pressure, the creativity arises. So we saw new ventures, new techs, new scientists. It was really interesting during this pandemic in Brazil. And this is a great legacy because traditionally, Brazilian companies were not so used in investing in innovation, except the large Brazilian corporations, right? Because we're always struggling short-term versus long-term. And back again, there's a strong correlation, efficiency versus resilience, okay? So the companies need to think about short-term versus long-term, which is linked to efficiency versus resilience. And the third legacy that the COVID gave to us is the opportunity for the Brazilian companies, right? So Francisco mentioned the Brazilian companies could be part of a global supply chain, especially the tech chain. And this disruption in supply chains created opportunities for new entrants. There is a reset in the market. So this is an opportunity for Brazilian companies that Francisco mentioned. We can reposition Brazilian tech industry under this new scenario. I'm pretty much confident on that. And the fourth legacy is the awareness of importance of telecommunication infrastructure. We still have 25% of population without internet access. And this was very critical to remote work, online classes, etc. So every effort to improve and universalize the telecom infrastructure is a must in our society, right? There is no industry 4.0 without connectivity. So those are the points that I think are the legacy that the COVID has given to us.
Interesting. And, you know, I think it's important to recognize, obviously, that the cost of COVID has been enormous. And, you know, that is something I think we all need to acknowledge. And yet, at the same time, it has really focused a lot of minds on how we can prevent a tragedy like this from happening again. And coming out of that, as you said, Marcia, is a legacy of changes in the market. How do you see the competitive dynamics, you know, in the market for Industry 4.0 evolving after we emerge from this pandemic?
Yes, this is also a good question. And specifically for Industry 4.0, we have conducted several studies in terms of how big is the market that we could be capturing in Brazil. But we needed to understand the readiness of technology, okay, to boost the Industry 4.0, and especially related to 5G. Yeah, so back to the Francisco's point. We have one axis a potential market, and other axis we have readiness, especially connectivity in our country. So when we see the opportunities in our market, I see several quick wins that are the innumerous Industry 4.0 use case that do not depend heavily on the full 5G. When I say full 5G, are the ones that with ultra low latency capabilities, which means rapid response. So those use cases are the ones that can take off very immediately. And usually those are the ones that are telemetry IoT use case. So those are the ones, that's the reason that we need to understand the market value and also to understand the readiness in Brazil. Because we still do not have 5G in our country, okay? And also what Francisco mentioned in terms of investing heavily in IoT, and I think later on Marcia can say about that. The good thing in Brazil is that we Brazil has been creating awareness and forming people that are literate in IoT for the last 4 years. Yeah, I myself, I take part of Polytechnic School. I'm forming the 4th class of engineers, IoT engineers. So the last 4 years, we have been investing in forming people and build an infrastructure, minimum infrastructure of IoT. So that's the reason that Brazil has relatively high IoT maturity. And this is very interesting because we have conducted a global study. Deloitte has conducted a global study on wireless connectivity. And we compare countries. And we have identified that Brazil has a high level of awareness of IoT and LPWAN technology, much above the average. Okay, so this is a good point of Brazil. The awareness we have already have happened. We have a workforce that understands. We have a supply of technology and solution providers in IoT. And so most of telemetry cases, like in manufacturing, in chemical, agriculture, healthcare, are ready to go in Brazil. We don't need to wait for the full 5G. Because for the full 5G, what I say, the standalone mode, when we have the ultra latency capabilities, we can capture value in other critical cases like autonomous vehicles, remote surgery, and drones, and so far and so on. Okay, so those are the applications that will take longer to mature, and you will add significant value to our industry. So, in terms of industry verticals in Brazil, due to our extension of our length and people diversity, I foresee a great disruption in healthcare in Brazil. Because the power of IoT, 5G, AI, edge, to attend underserved population in remote locations, especially in those locations that we do not have enough specialists and medical equipment, I saw a great value. And I'm pretty sure that several IPs could be generated in Brazil, and similarly to agriculture. So healthcare in agriculture is a vibrant also industries that are being created here in Brazil with IoT. And generally speaking, in terms of technology disruption, also, I foresee the telecommunications layer disaggregation when we saw Open RAN, which will enable different business model in connectivity, will also boost Industry 5.0 in Brazil. So I'm very optimistic that Industry 5.0 will have a boost, will speed up due to COVID, and will be even speed up due to 5G. Exciting times we are living in Brazil.
Yeah, interesting. Marcia, in my experience in Brazil and having worked with you in Sao Paulo is that the awareness of IoT is very high, that there is a entrepreneurial spirit amongst Brazilians, I think, when it comes to facing these kinds of problems. And that actually is a perfect segue to Professor Zuflo. Particularly, I'm keen for your perspective on how Brazilian technology companies and startups in the Industry 4.0 space have reacted over the last year. What has changed in the startup world in Brazil?
Thank you, Geoff, and thank you, colleagues from Deloitte, for this invitation. And I think the pandemic bring the entire world on this new war. We are facing some war conditions when we see the global supply chains being affected and how we are addressing some problems that are usually associated to wars. We are talking a lot about resilience, but the resilience of many organizations are also associated to the flexibility to face the problems imposed by this pandemic. And particularly on the 4.0 context, I'm seeing a lot of activities. And that is come down to some concepts that I was discussing in this panel, like exponentials and singularities. I'm a professor in electronics, and everything on semiconductor are exponentials. The transistors, the diodes, and always we discuss with students when the exponential is sparked, and that needs a singularity. And I think the pandemic is the singularity that is sparking an exponential process on the IoT and the 4.0 industry. And I hope many years from now, as we know that the penicillin, the X-ray, and other good things for humanity, the computers have been invented in previous wars. I think IoT and 4.0 will be a strong exponential legacy of this pandemic. Particularly in our environment, I'm deeply involved in the semiconductor and the innovation industry on IoT and 4.0. We definitely observed much more activity. Our startups are working 24 hours a day. They are accelerating their business. Some of them are capturing much more funding from investors. So it's strange to say, but particularly on the innovation arena, I should say that we're working much more and we're having much more business that eventually we have before the pandemic. And we can see some evidence for that. For example, if you consider our agribusiness market that is highly industrialized in Brazil, is the sector who is more absorbing IoT and 4.0. The Brazilian economy grew last year from the agribusiness point of view. So that means that the sectors that early adopted 4G and IoT in Brazil, they are doing very well despite the situation in the whole industry.
Great. I'm curious, Professor, how you are preparing the next generation of experts to participate in that world as a university professor. Marcia mentioned education earlier. I'm keen for your perspective.
Yes, there is a lot of things going on. We had launched a few years ago a number of initiatives on STEM and IoT training for young people, kids K-12, around 12 years old. We have an initiative named Code IoT, where we are offering online courses on IoT and certification. We just reached 200,000 students during the pandemic. So the adoption of online learning had increased a lot. On the arena of technology, people are starting to discuss the 5.0 industry. I think by the end of the pandemic, some premises on a normal world before the pandemic, and now we'll have a different world. It will be completely different. We all agree that the world will be completely different. And some premises, especially when we consider the Cold War 2.0, that is mostly affecting the semiconductor industry globally, we have been involved in a number of discussions with Europeans, Americans, North America, and Asian universities. So there are around some discussions about some corrections in the 4.0 movement, announcing probably the 5.0 revolution. And also on IoT, we are hearing a lot about what we call IoT 2.0 or IoT++, where the cognitive edge, the intelligence in the edge will be much more relevant. And we should not forget that 5.0, many people like me were pressuring to accelerate the deployment of 5.0 because, as Marcia mentioned before, it's happening already. It's happening already. In here, last year, we spin off an IoT global platform named Caninos Locos in honor of John Maddock Hall, one of the mentors of Linus Torvalds in the Linux adventure. And we should say that the program is being accelerated in these days. And one explanation for that is the pandemic that is opening a lot of possibilities. Let's remember that humans and computers, they evolve each other when they interact each other. IoT is just another step in this evolution. So I am a humanist. I believe on humanity. And also I believe that humans and computers can do much more. One professor last week mentioned that this war is a war against the virus and the human knowledge. Let's say that we do not have IoT, artificial intelligence. How many time do we waste to develop vaccines, ventilators, and other technologies that are preserving lives?
Well, I think that's an excellent note to end our panel on. We have a few more minutes for question and answer from the audience, but thank you for that hopeful note to end this on, Professor Zufo. So the first audience question asks, do Industry 4.0 and environmental sustainability walk together? I'm going to take a first stab at responding to that, and then I'd love for people's perspectives on that. The forum a few years ago did some research on IoT use cases and found that about 84% of IoT deployments were aligned with UN Sustainable Development Goals. And that's actually quite obvious when you think that many IoT use cases relate to reducing waste, using assets more efficiently. Often they result as a byproduct, they result in more resource efficiency, and sometimes even, directly can be positive kind of outcomes for the environment. So an interesting statistic from our own research. I'm curious if any of my panelists here have a perspective on that they'd like to add.
Can I do a mention on this?
Sure.
I think IoT will be the technology that will save Amazon, for example. We have been working a while on IoT to protect endangered specimens due to the global environmental challenges. We have a project named here IoT, the Internet of Turtles. We successfully are tracking oceanic turtles and monitoring global environmental changes using such technology. So it's all about the context awareness, how aware humanity will be informed about the situation of this planet. And I'm pretty sure that I'm so optimistic about 4.0 and IoT. I think humanity will really recognize such technologies as the tools for the better planet.
Oh, Francisco, if you wanted to add something, you're on mute. Oh, we may have lost him. Okay.
Okay, sorry, I was on mute. It just always happen. Just to add some few words on this, I think that one thing that we are now discussing a lot in this environment that we have that address, sustainability and predictive maintenance, 5G predictive maintenance, something that would bring benefits to reduce costs and also predict events that could happen and save lives. I would say if you have this applying artificial intelligence and machine learning, for instance, so this could be something very interesting. With Qualcomm has some projects. We have a project in C4IR on that, the Center for Industry Revolution we are a sponsor of this project on this area using private networks. I think that many of tragic catastrophes that we see around the world, maybe it won't happen if you have this predictive maintenance apply, and that it could be something that very important. And 5G will also bring this opportunity with the low latencies and all aspects of related to 5G, mainly millimeter waves also. So new spectrum that are being to be available for the operators, and not only the operators, but also mainly for the private networks, to be applied by the private networks, which is a new business also that Qualcomm believe that will develop a lot from now on.
I'd love to turn to Oliver's perspective on this idea of kind of almost like predictive environment, as the president of or CEO, I should say, of a IoT company that's deploying those kinds of solutions. So yeah, Oliver, I'm curious for your thoughts on this. Oh, we have our second muted speaker. It wouldn't be a panel if that didn't happen. So.
I would fully agree with Francisco. I think in the short term, we overestimate some technological impacts, but in the long term, we underestimate them. I remember many years ago when we heard the first IoT studies and what IoT could do good for us. There were many expectations that were not met in the short term. But now I think we are at a pivot where we see that those technologies have a certain maturity, where we see that there is also a huge acceptance. And now we are collecting, let's say, the low-hanging fruits of these efforts. At the same time, but this will be maybe a topic for a separate discussion, we see that the technology and the environmental aspect have to be completed by a third one, and this is the social aspect. So how can society adopt IoT technologies and not get lost on the way to adopt those technologies? And I think especially World Economic Forum has done a great job in order to show how technological progress and social progress and also wealth can go hand in hand, so that we do not lose the people along the way, but we take them with us and create a win-win situation.
Thank you, Oliver. And I appreciate you kind of getting the forum's message out there. That's exactly what we're aiming to do and strike a hopeful note in this kind of challenging time. Another question from the audience here, and we've got another 5 minutes of our panel. How have these accelerated Industry 4.0 transformations impacted education? As it was the next question. So we heard an example from Francisco earlier. Maybe I'll start with Professor Zufo, and then Francisco will come back to you. Well, what are some of the changes in education that you have seen?
Well, I'm a professor on engineering. And again, I think resilience is associated to flexibility and agile techniques. We have a success case here down at USP, talking also about social responsibility. We have an expressive movement here where more than 250 volunteers join together, more than 1,000 donators, individuals, and 10 corporate donators. In 4 months from scratch, we fully conceived, designed, certified, and now manufactured, and we distributed ventilators that are IoT ventilators. So for the newer generations, especially those that are at the university, students, they need to adapt to new contexts. Unfortunately, there are some professions like tourism. We have, unfortunately, has an interdisciplinary center. We have students from USP that study tourism, and particularly this economical domain is completely frozen by the pandemic. And while another domains like there is no unemployment, let's say, for artificial intelligence computer scientists. So what we discussed a lot with students is how they should be adaptive for these new contexts and give answers to society. In our ventilator, most of the engineers are young engineers, most students from the university, and they have this kind of purpose achieved because they are answering the society for a given need. And usually in wars, many questions arose rapidly, and we need to answer rapidly, like the vaccine problem. Let's say now the humanity is not facing anymore having or not having the vaccine is a huge and a global logistics problem. And we need to point to youngs that they need to observe this and take some lessons for the future of their careers, because we are pretty sure, despite the whole stress, the pandemic will finish in some day. I hope soon. But what are the lessons that we will take to the newer generations? And what is the responsibility and ethics of professors dealing with this situation with students?
Oliver, did you have something you want to add to that?
Maybe a quick note, because I think what we observe is that through IoT, knowledge and skill sets have to become more interdisciplinary. So IoT is the fusion of hardware and software, and we see that there is a more generalistic skill set needed, and also the knowledge cycles are rotating faster and faster. But at the same time, and this is the positive message that I would use as a conclusion, IoT offers, or digitization and IoT offers us, first of all, kind of ubiquitous access to knowledge, which is great, which was not the case 20 years ago. And at the same time, it gives us the opportunity to execute our work from anywhere in the world. I mean, this is exactly where we started, with the digital technologies that enable us to work from home, to work from remote, no matter whether I'm an office worker or a maintenance worker. And I'm curious to see how this will develop in the future.
Wonderful. That is a hopeful note to end on. So on that, I will hand it back to Anna to conclude. I want to thank our panelists here for a really wide-ranging but also very in-depth conversation. So thank you for your time, and I'll hand it back to Anna at that.
Well, Jeffrey, thank you very much for your contribution, not only for you, but Marcia, Marcelo, Oliver, and Francisco. Thank you very much for your experience shared with us today, actually now, tonight. Thank you very much and see you soon. Considerando o painel que acabou de acontecer, a gente entende que temos muitos desafios no Brasil, e não são somente no Brasil. A gente tem uma situação mundial de pandemia ainda, com grandes desafios, mas sim também com já grandes conquistas. Que sejam pequenas, que sejam médias, que sejam grandes, elas já existem, e elas são fruto da colaboração muito bem posto aí pela Marcia e por vários dos nossos outros colegas convidados. E, no fundo, estamos aqui olhando os próximos passos e como a tecnologia vai nos levar mais adiante. E, por falar em mais adiante, eu queria falar sobre amanhã, dia 25 de fevereiro, às 17 horas, anota aí, porque isso é importante. Nós vamos realizar um webinar novo chamado Acelerando a Indústria 4.0. Isso marca o nosso lançamento oficial de um centro de excelência da Deloitte para projetos e ativos de capital. Essa sessão vai ser liderada pelo nosso líder de Capital Projects e Asset Transformation e Financial Advisory, Eduardo Raffaini, então não percam essa sessão de amanhã. Ele vem junto com o nosso economista aqui da Deloitte, Giovanni Cordeiro, e também com o professor da Fundação Dom Cabral, Hugo Tadeu, que lidera o núcleo de inovação e empreendedorismo da instituição. Se você quiser se inscrever, você já deve estar vendo aqui do meu lado direito um QR Code. Mira aí seu celular e já faz a sua inscrição, porque não dá para perder amanhã. E outra grande novidade que eu os convido a conhecer é o nosso documentário, também já lançado agora, Indústria 4.0, antes e depois da crise. Não dá para perder porque foi patrocinado pela Deloitte, tem um incentivo à lei e à cultura com produção independente. Foi um trabalho de mais de 2 anos de pesquisa, de depoimento, de coleta de material. As gravações ficaram muito legais e eu sugiro que vocês também nos acompanhem. Se quiser saber mais, é lá no www.deloitte.com.br. Bom, a gente está chegando ao fim do nosso evento de hoje, mais um que marca a nossa trilha de eventos digitais, em parceria com a Singularity University. No fundo, hoje a gente levantou muitas poeiras e discussões sobre robótica, sobre logística, riscos e, por que não, quando estamos falando de futuro, estamos mirando também o desconhecido. E toda essa excelência operacional que a gente almeja e que a gente discute, ela traz também uma grande automação dos nossos serviços, dos nossos processos industriais, das nossas necessidades como consumidor. A gente fala muito sobre eficiência nos nossos negócios, indústria, mas hoje a palavra de ordem passou a ser resiliência. Os nossos negócios precisam admitir que o mundo mudou e que a pandemia nos ajudou a olhar para esse coletivo e para a nossa sociedade. A gente fala, sim, claro, sobre a nossa necessidade de conexão, sobre infraestrutura, sobre o ferramental e os nossos equipamentos, mas a prioridade precisa estar na agenda dos nossos negócios, na agenda das nossas organizações e, lógico, tudo isso através de muita parceria. O convite da pandemia foi bastante forte em relação às iniciativas do poder público com o poder privado, e essa aliança nos levou muito mais adiante, não só no Brasil, mas no mundo inteiro. Então, falar sobre inovação, sobre telemedicina, sobre os desafios da nossa infraestrutura, quando a gente fala de saúde, educação, agronegócio, consumo, tudo isso também depende de uma gama de profissionais especializados, de pessoas que sejam capazes de liderar essas transformações. E sabemos que o desafio das pessoas é o nosso grande e maior desafio, e não podemos também esquecer que, por vezes, a maturidade do nosso mercado, a maturidade do Brasil, do nosso empresariado, das nossas discussões, também precisa estar lá na ponta da nossa agenda, para que a gente não perca a nossa oportunidade. Enfim, eu vou encerrar aqui com vocês hoje. O propósito da Deloitte é, sim, criar um impacto positivo. A gente está aqui esperando vocês, se vocês quiserem saber mais, se quiserem falar sobre Indústria 4.0, se quiserem ler os nossos artigos, assistir aos nossos vídeos, pesquisas, estudos, tá tudo lá, tem coisa nacional, tem material global, no nosso site você vai encontrar, e com as nossas pessoas. Estamos disponíveis, estamos esperando vocês, e no próximo evento a gente traz mais novidade. Portanto, boa noite para todo mundo que esteve conosco. A presença de vocês é sempre a melhor opção para que estejamos aqui no ar. Um beijo muito grande e até a próxima.